courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast. This is episode number 473. I am Andrew in our forum, and Andrew NLSC on Twitter. Joining me as always, my co-host Derek. He is D3 in our forum, and also on Twitter at D3G and D384. Derek, what's new?
We got some super exciting news from John Z1, friend of the show. We had him on recently on the NLSC Podcast. He's obviously the creator of the amazing NBA Jam Legends on Fire Edition mod. He let us know, though, that he's also created a 22-23 season update mod for this game, and people are going to love it.
It's going to be awesome. We had a few people comment after the Legends on Fire Edition came out that they thought it was a really cool concept, but they wanted a roster update, a current season update for the game, which is another reason why we want a new game, right? A new NBA Jam game, as we've discussed before. But this is the next best thing, and if you've played Legends on Fire Edition or seen it in action, you know it's going to be fantastic. As you said, it's going to have 20 playable teams, 20 finished and playable teams. The other 10 only exist in Road Trip. At least for the moment, they're using replacement heads. For example, Julius Randle is using Nene's head just as a placeholder at this time. Obviously, these are mods that can be updated later on, but it's going to be a fantastic 2023 season update. Obviously, he's going to have more details coming soon, a preview video, everything just like Legends on Fire Edition. So yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun to play with as well, Derek, because even if you and I aren't the biggest fans of the current NBA, it's still cool to play with the latest players.
I know that the attention to detail is going to be insane, because even in Legends on Fire Edition, I have used the Celtics with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, and Rob Williams is also in that mod. And I played against the Denver Nuggets with Jamal Murray and Jokic. And again, all those players that I just mentioned, they're not in NBA Jam on Fire Edition, because that game came out in 2011. So the attention to detail on Jason Tatum's face, Jaylen Brown's, Murray's, Jokic, everything just looked awesome, and it played awesome. So that's just a small taste of how great this new mod is going to be.
So we're going to have some more information on that coming soon. Look out for that. We'll definitely have a bulletin on the in the forum and on the main page. We'll have our own previews of it, I'm sure, on our YouTube. John's going to be putting together his preview, all the documentation, of course, and we'll be talking about it on the show, no doubt.
And we'll definitely be connecting on Parsec and playing this as well. As it is, we've already connected a couple times on the NBA Jam Legends on Fire Edition mod, and it was a blast.
And speaking of Parsec, you and I need to jump on again. We haven't played, I think, since we played NBA Action 95, which you can go back and listen to last week's show, when you're done with this one, of course, and listen to our deep dive into that quite overlooked game. But yeah, this past week, and I miss it. I miss our regular sessions, Derek.
Yeah, I do too. We were connecting so much on NBA Live 10 and then NBA Jam on Fire Edition in the past. But life catches up with you, right? And sometimes, your schedules don't match, and, life gets busy. And I know that's the way it's been for me. Life has been super busy lately with a lot of different things going on. So I haven't been able to get on Parsec as much as I would like. However, that's an easy fix. When things calm down, we'll be able to get on there and we'll be able to have some fun sessions. However, what I did to get my fix in, Andrew, was I threw on NBA Live 95, the PC version.
Classic.
And yeah, unbelievable presentation on the game. We've talked about it before. And I played against the computer, and it was one of the best games I have ever played in my life against the CPU. A lot of drama. It was chippy. It was competitive. Basically, and just to let our listeners know, that gameplay video is up on the NLSC YouTube. It's about 13 minutes in length, and it's the game highlights. Basically, Alonzo Mourning, I was using the Hornets. I was against the CPU Bullets, and Alonzo Mourning got injured for the game in the first quarter. It was a flagrant foul on George Mirasan. And then on the next possession, to get him back, I injured Chris Webber. Wasn't intentionally injuring him, but I went after Chris Webber, who was going up to score, and Chris Webber ended up getting injured for the quarter. And there was a lot of pushing in the game, a lot of knocking players over. It was super physical. I had to come back from being down double digits in the game because Chris Webber and Rex Chapman were absolutely killing me. They were blocking a lot of my shots because I was playing on all-star difficulty. I really had to fight to win. And my brother was actually watching the game, and he was getting super pumped about all the on-court happenings, and he was talking about it. He was super into it. And that's how entertaining that game was. Of course, for the Hornets, I leaned heavily on Hersey Hawkins and Del Curry for their lights out shooting. And I used Larry Johnson, but he was a little bit limited because he was being guarded by Chris Webber for the game. And Chris Webber is obviously a good shot blocker, and he's contesting everything and making me miss and whatnot. And our good friend Scott Burrell is on that Hornets team.
Of course, yes.
I believe he's actually the one that I injured Chris Webber with.
So coming up big again.
He came up big again, exactly. Not in the same way, but he did.
Multi-talented star, Scott Burrell.
Oh, my God, yeah. I mean, he should be in the Hall of Fame, based on his video game exploits, at least. But my backup for Alonzo Mourning is like 39, 40-year-old Robert Parrish. So he didn't exactly light it up for me. And then behind him, he got injured in the fourth quarter. So Kenny Gaddison had to play the rest of the minutes. So I had a couple injuries in that game. But two fun teams. That Bullets team has Juwan Howard, Chris Webber, George Mirasan, Rex Chapman, Scott Skiles. Looks really good on paper. A really fun video game team. And then the Hornets, like I stated, Hersey Hawkins, Del Curry off the bench, Muggsy Bogues, Larry Johnson, Alonzo Mourning when he can actually play, and whatnot. So NBA Live 95, that zoomed out isometric camera view, the dunking on players, and then you pointing at them and they're like getting up dazed and their head is shaking and whatnot. It is just pure 90s bliss between the presentation and the gameplay. So I encourage our listeners, check out that NBA Live 95 gameplay video that I put up on the NLSC YouTube.
Definitely do that. I've got some thoughts, obviously. You've been playing the 1995 season with Stildo 33, our friend Kenny, on NBA 2K19 with that fantastic mod. So you've been playing with these players, with and against these players quite recently, albeit with some more advanced mechanics in 2K19 compared to Live 95 PC. But you're very familiar. I mean, you were already familiar with that period in the NBA and those players anyway, but in particular, you have been using those players and using their strengths and so forth in 2K19. Did that come to mind at all? Some of the your usage of those teams in that season when you were playing Live 95?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Basically going through the rosters, it makes me think of that NBA 2K19 94-95 season with Stildo 33. Obviously, memorable players in strange locations in that season. For example, like we've talked about Kendall Gill with the Supersonics. He wasn't there for long, but he's memorable on that Supersonics team. And that Supersonics team is actually the team that I'm using in that 94-95 season on NBA 2K19. But yeah, I think that it's a glorious time in the NBA. 94-95 is the return of Michael Jordan, even though he played only 17 games in the regular season. It was such a huge deal when he did come back. Memorable playoffs that year with the Orlando knocking out Jordan and the Bulls and whatnot. And then, Hakeem with the recently joined Drexler winning his second straight championship and Drexler's first and everything. Just, it's an amazing time in the NBA, and it was an amazing time to be a fan.
And to pull out the comeback victory, especially in a game that does have more primitive mechanics, sometimes you get robbed on jump shots. They're not as effective as they should be in some older games. But it's another example that you just need to be patient and persistent. You can't just try catching up with a bunch of threes, although sometimes that does work if you do have a great shooter. But just being patient about it and picking your spots, making the right plays, making a defensive stop, taking it one play at a time. Just as in real life, you can do that on the virtual hardwood, and it is so satisfying.
Yeah, like I said, my brother was watching the game, and he said after I won the game, he goes, "I can't believe you just won that." Because I was fighting an uphill battle for the majority of that game up until the fourth quarter. I think I was down the whole game up until that point, because they were being so physical, and they'll block multiple shots on one possession. You'll go up, they'll swat you, you'll go chase down the ball, and you'll think you have made a move to get space, and you'll get swatted again, and you get like a shot clock violation, or it's like they'll run down the second one and they'll head the other way and they'll score. When you play on the NBA Live 95 on the higher difficulty levels, they shoot a really high percentage. In fact, in the first half, the Bullets shot, I think, over 70% against me. And it wasn't just dunks and layups. Rex Chapman was hitting threes. I want to say Calvert Chaney hit a few outside shots. Weber was lights out from mid-range. So, it's really competitive. And you do have to use strategy. You can't just, run to the hoop and score. So, and you can't just, lose your man on defense, because if you do, you've played those games, they're going to run towards the hoop and score on you.
Of course.
So, it was a lot of fun. Nate Stasho, NBA Live 01 legend, actually asked a great question in the comments on that video. And I wanted to get your take on this really quick. He said, what is the biggest graphical jump? NBA Live 95 to NBA Live 2003, NBA Live 2003 to NBA 2K11, or NBA 2K11 to NBA 2K23. My response was NBA Live 95 to NBA Live 2003 is the biggest jump, with second being Live 2003 to 2K11. And the reason why I said that is because in NBA Live 95, sure, they look like human beings out there, 2 arms, 2 legs and everything, but they have dots for eyes.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And they're it's very primitive, the graphics back then. But when you get to NBA Live 2003, you actually start recognizing the players to and they start looking like their real life counterparts. And I think that's the biggest difference. And then obviously the atmosphere, the crowd's gotten a little bit better, the reflections on the court, the court quality in general and arena quality. I think that NBA Live 95 to Live 2003 is just a huge jump.
Oh, I'm inclined to agree. Again, you have those very primitive, by today's standards, mid-90s graphics. I mean, at the time we thought they were awesome, and look, there is still an awesome factor to them, don't get me wrong, but certainly by the end of the decade, those early 2000s, as you said, we were starting to see faces that were resembling the real-life counterparts. We've talked about the faces in Live 2000 before, so we don't have to go to Live 2003. We can say Live 2000, that we were starting to get some great-looking arenas, player faces, some of which hold up today, some of which look better than some modern faces, as we've said before, in Live 2000. So I definitely think that from the mid-90s to the end of the 90s, early 2000s is the biggest jump. I mean, look, 2K11 to 2K23, I think there is a huge jump there as far as quality of faces overall and a lot of environmental details. But by 2K11, it was looking pretty realistic,
Right. I see. The thing is NBA 2K11, when you look at Michael Jordan, it's like, that's Michael Jordan.
Sure.
That's a great face. When you look at Horace Grant, you're thinking the same thing. When you're looking at the majority of players in NBA 2K11, it's like, these are like real cyber faces, right? You can tell that they used a picture normally on these faces to implement into a texture and make it look a lot like them. And the molding of the models was advanced in 2K11. It advanced at that time. So I think that the atmosphere was also excellent in 2K11, like the crowd, the animated crowd, the people walking up the stairs in the crowd, all of that stuff, the court lighting, the arena lighting. I don't think that, even my brother and I have talked about this, if the graphics had always stayed as good as they were in NBA 2K11 and we never got a PS4 or we never got a PS5, we would have been happy with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That game looks that good. And I still think it looks that good.
It did need to get a bit, as much as I loved Live 95 PC, graphics did need to get a bit better from that point on to really justify the improvements in technology that were taking place, for sure. And my last observation here is that you had such a great and competitive game, in part because of the injuries, some major players having to miss parts of the game, or the rest of the game, as the case may be. I'm kind of surprised, though, because I know that you do like to play with fatigue and injuries off a lot of the time.
I only do that really with you.
Oh, okay.
So, or if I'm connecting with the community on Parsec and whatnot, just to kind of create a looser experience, and so people can use the stars more. Because you got to think about it, when you're playing 5 or 6 minute quarters or something like that, if fatigue is at a normal level and whatnot, and auto subs are on, you can only play your starters like 2 minutes. 2 or 3 minutes, and then all of a sudden they're yanked out of the game.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's not fun.
No.
Right? So, like, that's why I normally do that. But if I'm playing against the computer, a lot of times I will keep fatigue on and keep auto subs on and everything. However, one thing I did do for an adjustment on NBA Live 95 in that game is no, actually, I didn't adjust files. I sat Muggsy Bogues the majority of the game. So I didn't allow auto subs to completely take over. And the reason why I did that is because I couldn't hit a shot with him. He was missing everything at the beginning of the game. And I was like, I need shooting. So I brought in Del Curry, and I actually stuck Del Curry at point guard for the majority of the second half and part of the second quarter. And he actually ended up being the player of the game as a result. I think he had something like 19 points, and he hit some key threes for me and everything. But Muggsy Bogues, I just couldn't get anything going with him, so I overrode the auto subs and put Del Curry at point.
No, it definitely makes sense, and sometimes you have to do that in video games, as in real life. And of course, speaking of real life, there is a Wardell Stephen Curry starting at point guard these days, and he's a pretty good shooter too.
Yeah, exactly. So I actually wanted to give a quick update, too, on the NCAA Basketball 10 tournament. We did have one of our Final Four games get played yesterday, and that was Tecmo Bowl GGL using Kentucky versus Brent Lane with Wichita State. And it was an excellent game. It ended up being pretty close at the end, a lot of fouling, a lot of free throws and whatnot to decide that game. But John Wall in that game, ridiculous for Kentucky. And I think Tecmo Bowl had over 70 points with him en route to his win and his advance to the national championship game. But he's also paired in that game with, I want to say, DeMarcus Cousins at center, number 15. And they are both just absolutely awesome. And I think it was a little bit too much for Brent to combat. So Tecmo Bowl moves on, and that tournament has been awesome, and I'm glad that people are still enjoying it.
You say John Wall, but for legal reasons, we will say it was Jimmy Dore.
Right. Well, we'll just say number 11 for Kentucky.
There you go.
How about that? Oh, and Andrew, actually, before we talk about the main topic, I wanted to applaud two people in our Discord, Cavs4872 and Wishcard Rush, who have been connecting on the PS3 console using a DNS connection. And they've been playing NBA 08, NBA 07, the Sony series and whatnot. And they've been talking about it on the Discord and talking about the great games that they're having. You and I are going to have to try that sometime, because that is awesome. The fact that they're able to still, join a lobby on the PS3 console and get games in. I think that's cool. And I could even record the footage with the Elgato.
Yeah, and there are a few people doing this for various games over the years, these private servers. And this again highlights the something that we can't do, unfortunately, with NBA 2K when the servers get shut down. It'd be fantastic to do that. But yeah, these private servers for PS3 are facilitating these connections that are no longer available officially, but people are able to connect with them, kind of like Parsec, peer-to-peer. And yeah, it looks like a lot of fun, so yeah, let's give it a try with original hardware.
Yeah, plus I think those games are really unique in this space. I think you would agree. Whether it was Shootout back in the day or when it switched to, NBA 06, NBA 07, NBA 08, NBA 09. NBA 09 I'm not really a fan of gameplay-wise, but I think that those games are super unique with their commentary and their gameplay, and their look and their options and whatnot, like the life, etc. So I think it's awesome to revisit games like that because it's not NBA Live and NBA 2K.
Exactly. It's on my list to revisit those games. I do want to cover them for Way Back Wednesday. It'd be really cool to connect with them through this new way of doing it. Well, new to us, obviously, but since we've been using Parsec for our connections, so I'm definitely keen to give that a try. I will say that NBA 08 has the most insulting Steve Nash face I've ever seen.
Yeah, some of the faces aren't great. I think we talked about that on a prior episode. Certain faces are good, like Joe Johnson and whatnot, but that Steve Nash face is horrible.
I think I've made a better Steve Nash face in my in our all-time roster for Live 96, and it's just got 2 dots for eyes.
I think I could have. I think I could have probably drawn a better Steve Nash face when I was 7 years old than what's in that game.
Yeah, it's very insulting, but no, let's definitely revisit those games and see if we can get it working ourselves, and because that'd be really fun to revisit those games. I don't think they work with the emulator either, do they? Those games?
They do not.
Yeah.
I've never been able to, unless there's a new update that went through that I don't know about that would make them work. I've never been able to get past the boot screen.
That's right.
Using
they
the
boot,
RPCS3 emulator.
Yeah, they boot, but they don't work properly. There are some games in RSPC3 that do that. Yeah, but no, let's do that sometime.
That'd be great.
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, nba-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at nba-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community. So, Derek, you put out another prompt this week about the main topic that we're going to be talking about. Now, obviously, the NLSC is all about basketball gaming, so we talk about basketball games on the podcast, strangely enough. But this week, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about the games that we play other than basketball games, and it's a very interesting topic. Obviously, we do play other genres, and people in our community play other genres as well. As much as we are huge basketball fans, that's not just all that we're fans of. So, yeah, let's talk about what we do away from the virtual hardwood.
Yeah, I mean, people know about our obsession with basketball video games, Andrew.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, between our Twitter handles, our activity on the NLSC YouTube, our activity on the NLSC forums, etc. We live and breathe basketball video games. However, we've touched on it briefly, certain games that, you played growing up and you still play today. And, games like Bart versus the Space Mutants. I know that's your all-time favorite.
Of course.
The Fallout games and whatnot. But I think it'd be cool for the community to hear what our other interests are in the gaming space. And then I also wanted to know, hey, you know what? Does any of the basketball community actually, play some of the same games that I do today or that I did years ago and whatnot? So it will be cool to get to those responses after we go over our history with non-basketball video games. So I think a good way to go about this is to start with the games that we are currently playing or we're just recently playing and recently put down. So maybe a game we beat or maybe a game we spent a lot of time on but needed a break, etc. So my brother and I recently beat Borderlands and Borderlands 2 again. We had already beat those games when they were, off of the consoles, off of the Xbox 360. Borderlands, the original, is a game that we actually beat online using the console back when the game was new. But those games are always fun to revisit. Code Vein, which is a third-person action adventure or like RPG type game. That game's a lot of fun. You can summon a cooperative player on that and play it 2 players. So my brother and I play that. Conan Exiles, which is a MMO RPG. It's another one that we play. And when you hear these titles, just know that my brother and I live together and we have TVs lined up next to each other and computers lined up next to each other. So when we're connecting on these games, it's like a local online connection. So like he has his own screen to view his connection, and then I have mine to view mine. And it's a really cool setup that works really well for us. Elden Ring, this is a game that we've been super into recently. It's like a Dark Souls type game with like RPG elements and a lot of playability. It's going to have a lot of replayability as well. It's a mixture between PvE and PvP. So we've been playing a lot of that. Elder Scrolls Online, similar vein to Elden Ring, except we don't do any of the PvP stuff on there. My brother Nick was a huge fan of Skyrim, so building off of that, he was super excited for Elder Scrolls Online to come out and connect with me on it, because Skyrim was only one player. So we ended up, putting in hundreds of hours on Elder Scrolls Online. We recently put that one down. Garfield Kart, Andrew, you and I played that. It's not a huge part of my rotation, but it is in my Steam library. No, it's in my Steam library. Garfield Kart is kind of a Mario Kart-esque game, and it's also the greatest video game of all time. So I need to spend a little bit more time.
Many would say, yes. Many would say that Mario Kart actually ripped off Garfield Kart retroactively, somehow.
Yeah, somehow. Well, actually, Garfield, the cartoon, came before Mario.
This is true.
Let's get that out of the way. So Garfield actually holds longevity against Mario. Generation Zero, this is a first-person shooter that my brother and I also play co-op on, and that game's a lot of fun. Let's see, Monster Hunter World, we've spent over, I want to say, 500 hours on this game, and if you've never played the Monster Hunter World games, they're a challenge. They're a blast to play with somebody cooperatively. Just a ton of different monsters. It's great. I've captured a lot of footage of our fights on that game. I definitely recommend that one. Monster Hunter Stories 2, which is basically kind of like a more cartoon-esque version of Monster Hunter World, and it's more of an RPG as opposed to Monster Hunter World, which you're just kind of going into different areas and fighting different monsters and whatnot. And we put in, a couple hundred hours on that, and both of us had beat that game. Outward. So Outward is a third-person RPG created by an indie developer, and the soundtrack is one of the best in video game history, in my opinion, at least for that genre. And the gameplay is phenomenal. It is an incredibly hard game. They don't even give you a map to navigate the world. Like, you don't have something that's guiding you all over the place. So
that's old school. That's very old school.
It's super old school. And there's a map, but it doesn't tell you where you are on it, right? It's like in real life where you would hold a map up and then you have to kind of navigate yourself. It's not like games like Elder Scrolls Online or Elden Ring that's going to point you in every direction and tell you exactly where you are on a map. And there's a lot of people that have actually complained about that with Outward, saying, this game is too hard. I don't know where I am half the time. All of that stuff. You guys, you need to implement some sort of tracking system. And the developers are like, no, this is supposed to be an epic adventure, right? And we don't want to ruin the epic adventure aspect of it. And I think it makes that game super unique, and it's incredibly challenging. It has some of the coolest visuals that I've ever seen in a video game. So if you're into those types of games, definitely check out Outward. Unruly Heroes, my brother and I have almost beat this now. We've spent probably 50 to 60 hours into this game maybe. And it's a side scroller made by an indie developer with really cool characters, really cool level design, excellent gameplay. If you like those types of games, definitely pick up Unruly Heroes. We spent some time on Final Fantasy 14. And the reason why we got into these games, Andrew, is because back in the day, my brother Nick fell in love with Final Fantasy, the series, specifically with Final Fantasy Mystic Quest for Super Nintendo, but then also Final Fantasy VII for PlayStation 1 and Final Fantasy VIII. And he spent an ungodly amount of time on these games, fell in love with the series. So whenever a new game gets released for that series, he loses it, right? So Final Fantasy 14 Online was an online game that him and I were able to create accounts on, connect, and kind of share that experience. It's not his favorite Final Fantasy game, but it was cool to be able to play it with him because the titles that I mentioned prior were only one player. I have to mention Tennis Elbow and AO International Tennis and various tennis games because I grew up as my second sport being tennis. I grew up in the Pete Sampras, Michael Chang, Andre Agassi, Boris Becker, Stefan Edberg era of tennis, and it was such a big deal in my house. So tennis, when basketball wasn't on, basketball was the primary, it was tennis. It was watching the French Open, the US Open, Australian Open, etc., and watching all the, the regular tournaments that go on throughout the year. So I spent time on tennis games as well. And then, let's see, it's a couple more. Madden. So we've been playing the Maddens on PC since they came back onto PC, and I own all of them. We spent the most time on, I want to say, Madden 19, because visually it might be the best ever in the series, between the lighting, the animations, etc. And also there were some cool mods, like historical mods made for that game as well. And really, that's pretty much it, outside of obviously us playing the certain games on the emulators, us playing NBA games like NBA Live 2000, NBA Live 2004, 2003, Inside Drive 2003, NBA Playgrounds 1 and 2, Dunk Lords. We had the creator on our show,
Andy Hull. Yeah,
one point, Andy Hull. He was a great guest as well. But my brother and I beat the campaign mode on that game, some cool characters in it, some fun, fast action gameplay. So, and then obviously we're playing NBA 2K17, NBA 2K19, and I have that 2K19 season with Stildo. 2K, basically, I don't need to go over all the basketball games because I basically play them all.
Of course, yes.
Oftentimes my brothers play them with me. But that's pretty much it for games that we've been playing a good amount recently. So what about you?
Well, first of all, I love that you have that old school LAN setup, that you both got screens, you both got TVs, and your own connection. It takes me back to those old days of LAN parties back in the late 90s, early 2000s.
And obviously that works great, right?
Oh,
because
of course,
it's a local connection. Like, him and I are both plugged in to the router because it has 2 spots. So our connection is the best it can be. So like, the other cool thing is when we're playing games on separate screens, like MMORPGs and whatnot, or action games, like, I can warn him when I see something, right? Because I can see it on his screen and he can see my screen, so we can kind of watch each other's action.
For sure, yeah.
And I think it's like a super cool setup.
And the other thing that is different between how you and I game, obviously I'm playing a lot more solo player experiences, and also you follow a few more sports than I do, perhaps more casually than basketball, obviously, but I don't really follow any other sports. Professional wrestling is not a sport, obviously, sports entertainment, but not a real sport. Sorry if that's a spoiler for anyone, but the closest I get to playing other sports games would be wrestling, WWE games. I've actually stopped getting those at launch, Derek. I used to get those at launch just as I would the NBA games, but I've been a bit disappointed with them in recent years, so I've waited until they've gone on sale. And of course, a lot of the content is DLC, which really shouldn't be. Go figure, a 2K game with greed. Who would have thought? But so I do hold back on getting those, but I have a lot of favorites from the THQ days and the AKI days. You and I have talked about it before back in the day. WCW vs. NWO World Tour, Revenge, the WWF games at the time, No Mercy, and WrestleMania 2000. Obviously, old favorites that I like, but I'm still playing the newer ones as well, alongside the NBA 2K14, etc. that I've talked about before. A game that I need to circle back to, though, Derek, that I have been playing recently, and I did mention that I was going to get into it because I'd purchased it on a show, I think it might have been a couple of months ago now, but the Shredder's Revenge, the new TMNT game. That's a side-scrolling beat-em-up in the same style as the original arcade game, which I've also got again thanks to the Cowabunga collection, also available on Steam. And yeah, it is just such delightful retro fun. It has that same fun factor as the original arcade game, brand new adventure, brand new levels, etc. So it's one of those things where I'm playing, I thought, I'll just have a quick go of it just to see how it goes, and then it's one more level. So it's definitely one of those games, right?
That's right up your alley. That's right up your alley, right? Because, I mean, we grew up with side-scrolling bliss, right? So, like, NES, it was like Ninja Gaiden.
Yes.
It was Contra. It was, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It was, like the original NES version, which I spent, like, a ton of time with.
Double Dragon,
whatnot.
yeah.
It still has one of the coolest, like, in-game character swap systems that I've ever used, where let's say you're using Michelangelo and his health is low, you can switch to Raphael, and then when his health gets low, you can switch to Donatello, and you can alternate through the characters. And then, you're at a level that requires more reach, so you're going to want to switch to Donatello and make sure that he has high health. Like, it's still one of the coolest. But anyway, like Unruly Heroes for the PC, which I mentioned, amazing side scroller. It scratches that itch for me. If people have not looked on Steam at some of the indie games that have been released over the last few years, please take a look, because there's been a lot of really cool new side scrollers that have been released that are going to scratch that itch for you.
And that's the best part about the indie games on PC these days, and console as well, obviously, but they are more prevalent on Steam, that they do have that old school approach, and a lot of the things that we don't like about AAA gaming these days. And look, I'm not anti-AAA gaming to the point where I won't play them. Obviously, I'm playing NBA 2K, so I do play AAA games, but there is, as you say, a lot of releases in the indie space these days that are scratching that itch, having that old school action, focusing on what made those games so fun back in the day, and bringing it into the modern era. Fallout, obviously, is a game that I still play, Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas, a bit of Fallout 4 as well. I have to admit that it's going to make a lot of purists unhappy, Derek, but I didn't play Fallout 1 and Fallout 2 back in the day. I do own them now. I have played a little way through them. They're not really to my taste. I think they're fantastic games. Obviously, they set the stage for the series to become what it has become today. But at the time, I was playing PC games at the time they came out, but I wasn't really into turn-based RPGs. Still not. It's not really my thing. But again, they built the world. They set the stage for the later games by Bethesda. I still play Fallout 3 and New Vegas, as I said, primarily. Even though they're dated graphically, you know me, Derek, that is not a barrier to me, that they're not cutting-edge graphics. If I enjoy the story...
It's about the gameplay.
Yeah.
It's about the gameplay. Yeah.
Exactly. If I enjoy the story and the gameplay, and look, there are some issues there with the writing. Quite infamously, the ending of Fallout 3, which, if you've played it, you know what the situation is with the original ending before the DLC, the Broken Steel DLC came along. But I love going back and playing those games, playing through them all different ways. Well, I say that, Derek, but I found that the way I play a lot of other games is very similar to the way I play basketball games. First of all, if I get a title that I'm hooked on it for a long time. And that's what I play almost exclusively, or certainly it is one of the main ones in my rotation. Also, there's different ways to build a character in Fallout, obviously. And I always say to myself, this time, I always go with a gun, a character that's good with guns. This time I'm going to go with a melee build, or something like that. But I always end up drifting back towards what I'm comfortable with. And it reminds me so much of how every time with my career I would say, I'm going to make a point forward this time, or I'm going to make a power forward, or a glass cleaning big, or whatever. And I always end up going back to my playmaking point guard. So I'm very much a creature of habit, and it's interesting to me, reflecting on it, that I have very, very similar habits on the virtual hardwood and other games as well. Have you noticed that with you?
Oh, no, 100%. Well, I mean, it's for me, my brother makes fun of it. It's the same type of thing as whenever I put on a video game, the first person I go to use is Kobe.
Right.
Like, no matter what basketball video game, I'm a creature of habit. I love using Kobe Bryant in video games because of his skill set, because he can put the ball on the floor. He can execute great dribble moves. He has the Kobe fade. He can attack the rim and fly, all of that stuff. I can post up with him. Like, he's like a complete player. Right. So one of my habits is usually when I'm first trying a game, or I haven't visited a game in a while, I'm putting Kobe on the floor, no matter what. And then, yeah, I think I had a similar experience with Lord of Shadows 2, which I recommended to you. It's a Castlevania game, and it was released on the PS3 and on PC. I beat it on the PC version, but in the way that you said you can't put a game down if you like it and love it, I couldn't put that game down. I was playing that game like every single night in order to, get through the story, you enter new areas, fight new bosses, and beat the game. But yeah, no, I'm a creature of habit with games as well, actually. And before, I throw it back to you, I wanted to mention a couple other games really quick. So I did beat Castlevania Lord of Shadows 2. About halfway through Castlevania Lord of Shadow, which is the first one, and that's been a blast. The first one is still really good. I still prefer the second. And if any of our listeners want a great third-person shooter, adventure/action game that also has some RPG elements. Remnant from the Ashes. Remnant from the Ashes is one of the best video games I have ever played. Look up YouTube videos on it. Look at the reviews. The game is phenomenal, and it can be played with another human, like via like an online connection. My brother and I have been playing it through, but it's also a blast solo, and that's how you know a game is good, like you with the Fallout games, right? Because you can dive into that and get immersed solo.
Exactly. And, of course, you mentioned playing multiplayer, which you're more inclined to do, living with your brother, growing up with your brothers as you did. As I mentioned before, my cousin Clinton would come down and stay in the holidays, and we would play multiplayer basketball games and other games, of course. But we'd also play some solo games, some single-player games as well. Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time was a big one, with him on the walkthrough navigating me through some of the puzzles when we got stuck and things like that, and him watching and so forth. And he was, I'd say, you want to go? And he said, no, I want to watch you play and navigate. And he just enjoyed the story and the action and kind of cheering me on with that. And then we'd take a break and play a multiplayer game, of course. So he was actually an active participant. But yeah, that's something we did as well. And you telling stories about your brother, watching you play sometimes really reminds me of that.
Oh yeah, there was a time when I was first playing Castlevania Lord of Shadows 2. So he wasn't living with me. And you know how on Steam you have the ability to share your game and somebody can like watch you play?
Oh, yep.
So he was living in a different state at the time, and he was watching me do boss fights and whatnot and go through that game. And he said it was just awesome and super entertaining and everything. So, yeah, that game was also good to watch. So, no, I definitely know what you're talking about. The other game I forgot to mention, actually, that I beat recently was Devil May Cry 4. And the Devil May Cry series is one of my favorite in that genre. And I played the original, back in the day as well. But, yeah, just so people know, we love basketball video games. And basketball video games are always going to be number one for us as a choice. And I know that if we were to be on an island, and we could only choose a few games, that more than likely they would be all basketball video games. But as you can tell, we also play other stuff and we have other interests as well.
I mean, it would be hard if you said to me, on a desert island, you can only pick 10 games, for example, or 5 games, but you can only pick, or only half of them can be basketball games. It would be a really hard choice to pick my favorites. I mean, I have some that I can play over and over again. I mean, again, year 6 of 2K14, my career, I can stick with the game for a long time, Derek, as can you. But not having the choice. When it is my choice to stick with the game, that's fine. When it's not my choice to stick with the game, that's I would have to choose one over the whole collection, or a couple over the whole collection. That would be very tough. Another game that I finished myself was Monkey Island. Return to Monkey Island, which is the latest in the Monkey Island series. Grew up a big fan of adventure games from LucasArts and Sierra. Actually, I think that played into my love of Fallout when I was introduced to that by my cousin, actually, when I visited him. And I actually took him NBA Live 09 as a birthday present. And he was playing this other game when I got there. I said, "What is this?" And he said, "It's Fallout 3." And I was watching that and gave me a go at the time. And I was hooked and had to get it myself then. Within a week, I went out and bought it myself. So I mentioned that the original Fallout games are turn-based strategy games with their combat. They are very different. They're not that hybrid RPG, first-person shooter, third-person shooter as well that the current Fallout games are. But growing up, loving adventure games, loving interacting with NPCs, playing GTA, of course, and having that whole open-world experience, and growing up playing Duke Nukem 3D, Doom 2, the first-person shooters, there's kind of elements of all of that in Fallout, in the modern Fallout games, which is why they ended up appealing to me. Plus, I like the aesthetic and the overall concept of the story of the world and the lore. So it's interesting how all those other games really shaped my an almost immediate appreciation, Derek, of the Fallout games.
Isn't it funny how that works, though? Because the way I look at it is, if you had an appreciation for a certain style of game when you first picked it up, then, like back in the day, like the first time you ever picked up a game in that, in that type of look and gameplay style, that sticks with you.
Yeah.
Like, that's always going to be an interest. So, for example, if you loved Wolfenstein 3D back in the day, which was a first-person shooter, then more than likely you were going to love Doom, right? And more likely you're going to like games like Fallout or like even like Borderlands, etc. So it is really interesting. Like, you think about it, we loved Mario back in the day, right? Side-scrolling Mario. That led us to love Contra, which was also a side-scroller. Like, we liked that type of style and that type of gameplay. Then it led us also to love games like Earthworm Jim. I don't know if you ever played that one back on, Sega Genesis and whatnot. It's one of my favorite games of all time, and I beat it multiple times. That is a side-scroller, Boogerman on Sega Genesis. Great game if you haven't played it. But yeah, it leads me to games like Unruly Heroes today. So I do find that fascinating. And if you have a significant other, there's 2 PC games that I highly recommend right now. Missplosion Man and also Unraveled. And Unraveled, the first one, she beat that. My girlfriend beat that solo, and now we're working through Unraveled 2, which is fully co-op for us, and it's super fun to go through the levels. Another good one to play with a significant other is the Trine series. So that's another game that you can play fully 2-player co-op. It's a lot of times it's puzzle solving, all of that stuff, strategic, and it can be fun. So I really like those 3 games, and my girlfriend really digs them as well. So yeah, I mean, that's a lot for games that we're currently playing or recently put down. I was thinking about doing, before we get to the mailbag portion of this, doing a quick history of games that we spent a lot of time on in the past. And I figured I'd throw that over to you, and maybe we can start with the, say, PS3 era and go backwards, because we've discussed a lot of games here that were like PS4 moving forward.
Yes, so the PS3 360 era, I think apart from basketball games, probably most of them would have been Fallout or the wrestling games that I spent the most amount of time with the WWE series. But actually, for a while there, thanks to some friends who had it at the time, I really got into Guitar Hero and picked up the guitar and the peripheral and got some of the Guitar Hero games for Xbox 360. And
how have we not talked about this? Wait a minute, hold on. How are we not talked about this? I had a love for Guitar Hero and Rock Band.
Right.
And Rock Band, I was the drums. And which is really difficult, to be completely honest with you, especially like on the higher difficulty levels. But Guitar Hero, whether it was like I think it was the Van Halen one, the Aerosmith one, like they had the different like downloads you could get, or you could like purchase those versions, etc. We loved Guitar Hero and Rock Band.
They were huge for a while, weren't they? Those music and rhythm games were just absolutely huge, and they were great party games, I remember.
They were excellent party games. We used to get together with a group of people from work, and we'd have like a Guitar Hero night, and then my brothers also we would all play it, and we'd play Rock Band where one was the bassist, one was the guitarist, and I was the drummer. Yeah, they're excellent games even today.
And I did get GTA 4 and 5 on Xbox 360 as well, and I own them on other platforms, including PC. But compared to the earlier GTA games, and I know you've said before you're not a big fan of GTA, but for me, a lot of people say that the early games, the PS2 era games, have aged poorly. It's a valid argument, I can see that, but I still kind of enjoy them a little bit more. There's some simplicity, which does work against them, as you know, sometimes old games are missing really good innovations that were made later on, and that's what a good sequel, a good follow-up has been made. But I still really, Liberty City Stories, GTA Liberty City Stories that came out in 2006 is still my favorite in the series for all the advancements of 4 and 5, and of course, how many generations have they released 5 on now before they're finally maybe getting into 6 in the next couple of years? But yeah, I did get it on those platforms, but never really played it that much compared to PS2. And yeah, I think in some ways I've got more nostalgia for some PS2 releases than the 360, than that generation.
I mean, that makes sense. I think sometimes for certain types of games, simplistic controls and work better for it. And then a lot of times in those games too, the older ones, I think you probably realize this, they worked harder on the story.
Yes.
They worked harder on the little things. They worked harder on the presentation. And the biggest reason why is because they couldn't just wow you with visuals, right? So like they had to make the other parts of the game deeper and better and all of that stuff. So that, to me, that does make sense.
But what would be your most played games from that generation? The 7th generation, 360 PS3, I believe?
Yeah, so I've already discussed a few of them. So like Borderlands 2, we beat those on Xbox 360. Love those games. Castlevania Lords of Shadows, that was 1 and 2. That was both for PS3. Devil May Cry 4, I already talked about that one. I beat it on PC, but that was also a PS3 game. Dragon's Dogma, that's a game that I've spent maybe 100 hours on and whatnot. It is a one-player RPG. Super underrated in that genre. I love that game. So if you're looking for a one-player RPG with great graphics, deep gameplay, super challenging, all of that stuff, Dragon's Dogma is it. We played like all the Maddens on that generation. We also played MLB The Show 08. That's my favorite show game on the PS3 era consoles. Rayman Legends. So Rayman Legends is actually a game that we play co-op on PC on Steam. It's also another great game to play with a significant other, but it's actually my brother and I that are playing through this. It's comical. It's a side scroller. Great graphics, great gameplay. Definitely recommend Rayman Legends, but also the older Rayman games, whether it even be for the one for Jaguar 64, which is the one that introduced me to Rayman, or just the other versions of the game that came out on other consoles. Top Spin 4, which is arguably the greatest tennis video game of all time. Endless hours on that with my brother and playing the career mode, playing it online against each other, all of that. So that's pretty much it for PS3 gen for me.
I feel during that time, and even the PS2 era, that I really started to consolidate my gaming, and this is where we may differ, that I was mostly playing the basketball games, the wrestling games, GTA on those platforms. So I was really kind of closing my scope compared to what I was in the 90s, I feel.
Oh, no, I absolutely consolidated. Wait until you hear, and I'm not going to go over why I played each game because this show would be 5 hours, but wait until you hear all the titles I was playing back in the NES, Super NES, Sega Genesis days. It is a lot more. There are a lot more titles that I was playing, different genres, one-player games, two-player games. Like, wait until we get to that. I know we're on PS2 gen, though, right now. So PS2 and Xbox, what do you got?
Yeah, basically pretty much the NBA games, WWE games, and GTA for the PS2 era. I really kind of narrowed my scope by that point. And I think a big part of it is that I wasn't really renting games anymore by that time. I mean, they were still around. Video stores were still around. They were still renting games. In fact, even up until the PS4 era, we still had a video store. One of the last ones left here in Newcastle did have rentals for Xbox One and PS4, surprisingly. And I used the store a couple of times for disc cleaning after I got a couple of games off eBay, including NBA Street Volume 2, funnily enough. My copy was dirty, so I took it down there and got it cleaned, and all working now fantastic. But yeah, I wasn't really renting games at that time like I was in the certainly in the NES and SNES days. So I think that also contributed to that narrowing of the games that I was playing. Even N64, I didn't rent that much. I think the last one I rented was actually Conker's Bad Fur Day, which is a fantastic cult classic if you've played that one for N64. I ended up getting that for my birthday that year, but before that I had rented it. So yeah, I think not renting games or trading games and borrowing games from friends as much. I wasn't really discovering games as often as I was in my earlier days as a younger gamer. So I was really just sticking to what was really appealing to me.
I think it actually boils down more, at least for me, and I think for most other people, time.
True.
I think what happens is when you get into adulthood, suddenly instead of those 40 hours you would be working being free, you're working, right?
That's right.
So we're working 40 hours a week. And I know that for me, for a good part of my adult life, I had been working 2 jobs. So I was working a 40-hour a week job, and then I was working another job on the weekends and whatnot. So I think the biggest reason why my selection of games and the games that I actually played got so narrow in comparison to my childhood was just due to responsibility as an adult and just being super busy, and then getting involved obviously in relationships, right?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Your girlfriends,
Socializing, yeah.
Socializing, and maybe we're going out for drinks and whatnot, and then also basketball, like playing basketball. I was playing in 2 to 3 leagues at once most of the time, and when I wasn't doing that, I was looking for places to play pickup. And so obviously if I'm playing the real sport, which I'll always prefer over playing basketball video games will always come second to that, even though I absolutely love them to death. I'm not able to play the games when I'm playing the real sport. So like that's for like the biggest reason for me. So for PS2 for me, and it goes without saying with basketball games, folks, like PS3 gen, we were spending time on, NBA 2K7, 2K8, 2K9, 2K10, 2K11, 2K12, 2K13. And then for the lives, obviously they weren't a big hit, but obviously I was spending time on NBA Live 10, NBA Live 09, a little bit of time on NBA Live 08, etc. So basketball games, we don't even need to, we're playing them. So we don't need to go deep into that. PlayStation 2, Xbox days for me, obviously for the NBA games, Live 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, and 2006 were all big in my house. Every single one of those games got a lot of play. Then obviously NBA 2K3, ESPN NBA basketball, and ESPN NBA 2K5, NBA Ballers, which I love, Andrew. NBA Jam, which was hit or miss with a lot of people. It's probably one of the better games that were not part of the original crew.
I'd say it's Acclaim's best, yeah.
Yeah, Acclaim's best, probably. NBA Shootout 2003, NBA Street, and NBA Street Volume 2. So without saying, obviously, we're playing those games. So outside of that, the original Devil May Cry, Rock Band, Inside Drive 2002, 2003, and 2004 with my friend Craig. I went over his house to play those on the Xbox. Project Gotham Racing, my friend Craig and I spent a ton of time on that game, and that's pretty much it. My window had narrowed significantly at that point because, again, I just had a lot more responsibility in life.
No, I definitely think that is part of it. I hadn't really thought of that, but yeah, that is the turn of that from adolescence into young adulthood. Absolutely does make a difference. The PS2 for me was actually my first non-Nintendo console. Well, kind of. I grew up with originally had the Intellivision, and still have a working one. In fact, was the one that I was first introduced to gaming on. But I had Nintendo consoles through the 90s, NES, SNES, and Nintendo 64. As I've said before on previous shows, I was a big Nintendo fanboy, getting the magazines, laughing at all the fan art of Mario roasting Sonic with a flamethrower in the Nintendo magazine system, which was Australia's Nintendo Power. And yeah, I just played Nintendo through the 90s, and then Nintendo, it wasn't really great for sports games, honestly. I mean, I can appreciate Live 99 and 2000 on N64, and Hang Time. The Hang Time port was quite a good one as well, but that controller was not great for sports games by and large. I can play Could Run NBA Courtside. I can appreciate those games, but going to PS2 or Xbox when it came out was the way to go for those games. So I went to PS2 on that era, went to PS2 on that generation, and that's why I've kind of stuck with that since, or had the Xbox 360 for that generation, then went back to PlayStation afterwards. But yeah, Nintendo 64, I mean, it's the early 3D era. Some of the issues with those games also do affect both PC and PlayStation releases. I mean, you can look at the original Tomb Raider on PC. It is a classic, but compared to the later games, it is there's definitely some clunky moments to it from that early 3D era. But games like Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask obviously still hold up for me. Conker's Bad Fur Day, as I said, and GoldenEye 007. As much as I love those games that really stand out on that platform, and the wrestling games as well, I don't think it is my favorite platform from the 90s.
Yeah, so N64, I think it's one of the most overrated video game consoles of all time. I hate saying that because I did like some games for it. I don't think it was good at all for basketball video games. I think that the only sports game that I loved for that console was WCW versus NWO World Tour, which I actually think it's my favorite wrestling video game of all time. Just such a great selection of wrestlers, a great gameplay, great soundtrack, great party game. Like, I loved that game. Like, getting 4 people together and doing like a tag team match, excellent on that game. But I'm actually going to go back to the Dreamcast first before I get into N64. So Dreamcast, it was, for the NBA games, it was NBA Showtime, NBA on NBC, NBA Hoops, NBA 2K, 2K1, and 2K2. Ready to Rumble Boxing, Andrew. You and I connected on that briefly, and we actually had some fun. I don't know if you had ever played it before.
No, I haven't. Is that the one? Oh, no. Which is that one again?
Ready to Rumble Boxing is the one where I think I used Afro Thunder.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, and you actually kicked my butt because you were wildly just swinging, and I wasn't prepared for it, and I got my butt knocked out.
No, I did the most annoying thing that a newbie can do with any game, and that is beat an experienced player by button mashing. So.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. But it worked. You won. So
Yeah.
Ready to Rumble Boxing, I think, is one of the best boxing video games of all time, gameplay-wise. And it also has Michael Buffer announcing the fighters. It's just really cool. Crazy Taxi, which I've shown footage of recently of my girlfriend crashing into everything because she had never played it before, and she's going 100 miles an hour. She's going the wrong way. It was actually really funny, so I had to record it and whatnot. Crazy Taxi is a classic. Virtua Tennis was an excellent game, and Virtua Tennis games following it were pretty good outside of Virtua Tennis 4. Space Channel 5, which is kind of in the line of games of like Parappa the Rapper, which is another game I played on PlayStation 1. Space Channel 5 is basically a copycat game. It's a musical game and whatnot, and it is a lot of fun. And then NFL 2K1 was a huge hit with one of my friends growing up who we also played on the basketball team together. We always used to play NFL 2K1 at his place. For N64, really it was GoldenEye 007, Andrew. That was the biggest one. My brothers and I would hook up our controllers and go against each other, try to find each other and whatnot on the different levels on split screen. And GoldenEye 007 is still one of the best first-person shooters of all time, in my opinion. Diddy Kong Racing. I already talked about WCW versus NWO World Tour. F-Zero X, which we fell in love with F-Zero on the Super NES, and then this was the N64 version. That's a game that they got right. It was fantastic. Mario Tennis, Super Smash Brothers. Those were great party games, and we used to play those over friends' houses. And that is pretty much it for N64. I wasn't playing a lot of different titles on that system.
My controversial statement here about N64 is while Mario 64 was a landmark release, and I think it's a very good game, if you had to ask me which do you think is the best Mario game, and to be fair, I haven't played any Mario games since N64, so I can't comment on more recent ones, and when I say more recent, I mean even past N64, so there's over 20 years of Mario games there, but Super Mario Bros. 3 is still my favorite over World or 64.
Yeah, so I love Super Mario Bros. 3, and I'm not going to argue with anybody who says it's the greatest Mario of all time just because of the different variables that went into that game and the different way you had to attack levels, and it's also one of the harder Marios, in my opinion, to beat. And it has a lot of depth. So I think that it's hard for me to choose a favorite Mario game. I think that they're all special in their own little way. I know that Mario 2 stands out as the most unique of all time, of any Mario, in my opinion. They completely switched up the gameplay. The game even looks different than the other Marios in general. But yeah, it's really hard for me to choose a favorite Mario.
I mean, they're all pretty damn good games. I mean, outside of maybe some of the Mario's Time Machine or Mario is Missing, which are educational games. I mean, I think they're still well made for what they are, but they're definitely not up there with the regular mainline Mario games. And of course, Mario Kart 64, I enjoy very much as well. I do like the original on SNES. GoldenEye, I think is it safe to say that most people remember the game more than the movie?
Oh, no, 100%. I mean, I never watched the movie. I've never seen the movie.
I do like the movie, but the game is probably more memorable.
Yeah, that game had some of the best head-to-head gameplay ever. for that genre for a first person shooter. And it also had a really challenging campaign mode as well. So you could get immersed in both. I love GoldenEye 007.
I think if there's one strength of the N64, having those 4 controllers, some of those multiplayer games, like Mario Kart 64, like GoldenEye, it does hold up for that. Some of the better designed single-player games, such as Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and Majora's Mask, they hold up as well. But yeah, it was definitely... I mean, I enjoyed it at the time, but looking back, it was definitely affected by those limitations and those growing pains, if you will, of the early 3D era.
Agreed, 100%. So I'm going to get to PlayStation because I know you stated that you didn't have one growing up. So demo disc, we spent a ton of time on that. I know that sounds crazy, but it was the demo disc that had Armored Core, Steel Rain, Fighting Force, Croc, Intelligent Cube, etc.
How good were demos back in the day? Sorry to interrupt. How good were demos for PC or PlayStation or anything else? I mean, just being able to play just a snippet of a game, and you would over and over again.
And they weren't super limited, so you could actually get a true feel for the game.
Exactly.
Right? Like Steel Rain was like a full level. And it was a fun level, and it was a long level. And Fighting Force was the whole first area and whatnot. And it really gave you an idea of how those games worked, how they were going to play, how difficult they were. And it gave you an educated choice on whether you wanted to go buy, right? I loved the demo discs. That one for PlayStation is the best one I've ever played, though. It had, oh my God, I had 15 or 20 games that you could try, and it was just awesome. For basketball games, obviously, NBA Fast Break 98, Fox Sports NBA Basketball 2000, NBA Live 99, and NBA Live 2000, Space Jam, NBA in the Zone 2. So for basketball games, those are the ones I spent the most time on for PlayStation. Crash Bandicoot, the original, Final Fantasy 7 and 8. I've beat 8. I've mostly beat 7, and it was my brother that was obsessed with 9. But my brother fell in love with the Final Fantasy series officially with 7. Twisted Metal, I played that quite a bit. Madden 98 was the only PlayStation football game that I spent a good amount of time on. Parappa the Rapper, a lot of memories with that game. I can still quote the game, quote all the lines, all of that stuff, and I actually just beat it again last year for fun. The original Resident Evil, which at the time was just unbelievable. When you walk through the hall in like the first area and a dog jumps through the window, breaks the glass, and comes at you, I'm like, first off, that scared the hell out of me, number one.
So the atmosphere, yeah.
Yeah, number two, I'm like, can it get any better than this? This is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I love the original Resident Evil. Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver, Tony Hawk, the first one, and Worms Armageddon, which is another game that's a great, like a significant other game, or just like a great party game. Worms Armageddon is a lot of fun. So that's basically PlayStation for me. And I might as well get into this really quick. So Sega CD, it was NBA Jam, which had a different soundtrack to it, which is super memorable for me. Slam City with Scottie Pippen. And those are the 2 basketball games. And then the only other game I really played for Sega CD was Sewer Shark, which I beat it actually a couple times recently, and I beat it back in the day.
That's a classic for you, Sewer Shark. I know you can go back to that, and that's I have those games as well that you can just go back. No matter how many times you've beaten it, how many times you've played it, how many hours you've sunk into it over the years, it's nice and comforting and still fun. And you just got to go back to it. It
is comforting. It's you know the characters, you know the gameplay, you know how it's gonna look visually and everything, and it's like comfort food in its own way. Jaguar 64, Andrew, for me it was White Men Can't Jump for a basketball game, which is an absolutely terrible game. Atari Karts, which was basically a Mario Kart knockoff, but almost like with a goth horror look to it. You look up YouTube videos of that game. It's really interesting. And then Bubsy, that was another game.
Boy, that failed. In the era of mascots, mascot platformers, Bubsy did not last.
It wasn't that great of a game, but we remember Jaguar 64, we fell for the marketing, right? So we put on Bubsy and we're expecting to get explosive visuals, and we're like, wait a minute, this doesn't look any better than Super Nintendo.
No.
So Fever Pitch soccer game we spent a decent amount of time on, and then like I said, Rayman. But now we're at the end of this and we're getting into Super Nintendo, and Sega Genesis era, and then NES era. So I know we're a little short on time. We don't want to make the episode too long, but what games were you playing on those 3 consoles?
Well, before we get to that, I just want to give a quick rundown of some 80s and 90s PC classics, because I was playing on PC from the, I guess, early to mid-90s onwards. Street Rods 2, rather, the classic muscle car racing game where you're a teenager in the 60s and you get to buy a car and in the school holidays, and you got to do it up and do drag racing and racing in the aqueduct and everything, and getting winning cars and winning races, and then you've got to take on the king at the end. Could never get to them, could never beat the king, but that was a great game. You know, I also played Need for Speed back in the day, the original Need for Speed. I've dipped into that series over the years, but really, the original is still such a classic to me. Commander Keen, of course, Jazz Jackrabbit, those early platformers on PC, doing things that at the time not a lot of PC games were able to do. The platformers were very much a kind of a console-oriented genre, but they were some great platformers on PC as well. The adventure games I've mentioned before, from both Sierra and LucasArts, Leisure Suit Larry, or Leisure Suit Larry if you prefer, Monkey Island, Full Throttle, Day of the Tentacle, Sam and Max Hit the Road, all those classics. And not really only just Leisure Suit Larry from Sierra, because it was naughty. It was the naughty game in the in the 90s as a 10 or 11-year-old to be playing. So yeah, I played a lot of games on PC at that time, basketball games as well. But yeah, a lot of those classics, and The Incredible Machine as a puzzle game, classic puzzle game there. So yeah, I've got quite a history with PC gaming as well, Derek, which is why I still enjoy that to this day.
Yeah, I think my first PC game was NBA Live 98. So you got into PC gaming earlier than I did. I think I only started getting into that into like the mid 90s. And really what we were doing on PC at the time was building websites. I don't know if you did that back in the game.
Oh, yeah.
Like Press and
GeoCities.
You know, site builders like that. Yeah, exactly. GeoCities, Fortune City, all of that stuff. So we were having fun building websites, and we were still mostly playing games on the console. So NBA Live 98 and NBA Live 2000 were my big PC basketball video gaming experiences.
Awesome games too.
And gaming experiences in general on the PC back then. Yeah, and both great games, like you stated. So I'm going to do this a little bit differently. I'm actually going to, instead of going from Super NES, Sega to NES, I'm going to go NES to Super Nintendo and Sega. So really quick for me, Marble Madness might have been my first video game I ever played. And then Track and Field with the Power Pad, you know, the running pad, which was just awesome at the time. Then we played Double Dribble, obviously, which is my first basketball video game of all time. Galaga, Castlevania Simon's Quest, which was an RPG, Ghostbusters, which is an absolutely terrible game, Andrew, but we did spend a lot of time back in the day. Punch-Out! So we had the Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Version, and we beat that game so many times, it's unreal. Just an amazing game, one of the best sports games of all time. Jordan versus Bird, RBI Baseball, Ice Hockey, and RC Pro-Am. 4 sports games that actually came out all in 1988. Pure bliss for us. RBI Baseball, first baseball video game I ever played. We still play it today, my brother and I. It's a lot of fun. Ice Hockey, still my favorite hockey game, and second being NHL 94. So those have stood the test of time for us. Contra, you know my love for that. I beat that game with my brother recently and uploaded a video. We beat it in 12 minutes co-op without dying. Love that game. Dragon Warrior was my first RPG ever, and it's now, obviously, it's called Dragon Quest. But back then it was Dragon Warrior, especially like in the US and whatnot. And that's the game that actually encouraged us back in the day, me and my brothers, to want to learn how to read, because we wanted to be able to, like read the text on that game, whether it be in battle or throughout the story and all that stuff. We wanted to be able to follow along. Zelda, Bomberman, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Metroid, Rockin' Ball, which was a pinball game, Dr. Mario, which is basically the same type of genre as Tetris, Life Force, which was a flying game that you could play 2 players, like a flying side-scrolling shooter, Paperboy, Blaster Master, Double Dragon, which could, again, another game that you could play 2 players, Rush and Attack, an amazingly challenging side-scrolling adventure game, action adventure game. My brothers and I love that game. Jackal, Ninja Gaiden 2, Track and Field 2, and Super Mario Brothers 2, and Super Mario Brothers 3, also Duck Hunt. So when I told you, like NES, we were part of that video game boom, Andrew. We were picking up any game we possibly could, and we were playing all of them a ton. So all of those games that I just mentioned, we spent a ton of time on back in the day.
And of course, if you didn't own them, you could borrow them from friends or play them at friends' houses or rent them. As we said, going to the video store was such a big experience back in the day, not just for movies, but also video games as well. And that's probably how I played a lot of games for the first time. NBA Live 95 for Super Nintendo was a game that I rented long before I owned it. Could get it for a week, I remember, at the time. So you really had to get a season in and do some simulating or play on shorter quarters because there was no guarantee that somebody would respect your save file the next time you rented it.
Oh my God. Yeah. And how about like later on with having to use memory cards and then memory card corruption and stuff. We didn't even talk about that. So my brother Mark got through the majority of Quest 64, which was an RPG on N64. And he loaded up the game one day and his memory card said it was corrupted. So he lost that entire save. He had put over 100 hours into that game and he was working full time at the time. So when that happened for him, it was devastating.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, I mean, you had the risk of your cartridge not working and then obviously your saves being corrupted once we got to the memory card phase, all of that stuff. So, yeah, that was always a challenge. So finally, we can end this on Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis era. And I know that you are incredibly fond of this. I know that you were a Nintendo fanboy, self-admitted.
Oh, yeah.
Nintendo fanboy. But what games were you spending the most time on?
Well, for NES, it's funny, I got the NES in 1993 after the Super Nintendo had already come out. And the reason I did was my friend had one, and Super Mario Brothers 3, and I loved playing it at his place, so begged my parents for one for Christmas. So I got that. Really, if I'd known better, if we had the internet back then, could have researched and seen, hey, you know what you should really do? Get a Super Nintendo and Super Mario Brothers, Super Mario All-Stars, which I later did. But having the first Mario 1, 2, and 3, Defender of the Crown, a great medieval strategy game made by Cinemaware, who also made TV Sports Basketball, actually. And Solstice was a great puzzle game, the isometric puzzle game. Had a great sequel on SNES as well, Equinox. You know, I love the Flintstones and the Jetsons NES games as well. Some late releases there, some later classics. Unfortunately, I traded in the Jetsons for some reason many years ago. It's now worth about $1,500, Derek. So I traded in a very expensive game for not anywhere near that price back in the day for NES. Also loved Double Dragon as well. Double Dragon 2 was probably my favorite in that series. Loved playing that co-op or solo. A lot of great memories there. For SNES, Donkey Kong Country. The Donkey Kong Country trilogy is an absolute classic. As I've said before, I'm kind of partial to DKC 2, Diddy's Conquest, because of the pirate theme and some of the extra collectibles they had and some of the level design. But, of course, you know, it's a Donkey Kong game without Donkey Kong. Well, kind of. He shows up in the end and he technically gets the killing hit on Captain K. Rool. Spoilers. So it is definitely a great game. The first one is a classic as well. I do like the third one. It is the weakest of the trilogy, although it does have some strong points as well. They were trying to go for some more RPG elements. Uni Rally, which was also released in the States as Uni Races, the unicycle game. I know you love that one.
Yeah, that's on my list. I spent hundreds of hours on that game, as did my brothers, doing the time trial portion where you can try to get like the best time, you know, competing against each other and also against the computer. It is a sports game, really. It's one of the more underrated sports games of all time. Endless amounts of fun on that. So if you haven't tried Uniracers before, you know, try to pick it up.
And so creative. And I think that's what a lot of, as we said before, the indie games trying to go for that old school approach with the creativity and in the design and concepts in their games. This is what we saw during the 16-bit era and the 8-bit era. And sure, some of them flopped. Some of them were very poorly designed. For every Super Mario Brothers, there is a bad platformer knockoff of it that just gets the mechanics completely wrong, even though it came out years after the original Super Mario Brothers. But yeah, just the creativity and the passion that went into those games made them special, and they hold up. They hold up better than some of the early 3D games because of their they didn't have those same teething problems.
Soundtracks too. The soundtracks on a lot of those older games were special. And you put those on and you kind of get lost in them. They can kind of put a smile on your face. And Uniracers is one of those games that has like super memorable music, like a super memorable soundtrack and whatnot. So is that it for you for Super Nintendo?
I think so. I think those are the ones that I played the most of back in the day. Oh, and of course, just to mention a couple more PC games, again, Duke Nukem 3D and Doom 2 were the big shooters that I grew up with. But yeah.
So for Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, those are the consoles where I owned the most games and where I was spending the most time with video games. So my list is a little bit more extensive. For basketball games, it was Bulls versus Blazers, Tecmo Super NBA Basketball, Dick Vitale's Awesome Baby College Basketball, NBA Jam Tournament Edition, Live 95, Live 96, NBA Showdown, NCAA Basketball, NCAA Final Four Basketball, College Slam, Coach K College Basketball, NBA All-Star Challenge, and Tiny Toons Acme All-Stars, the basketball portion of that game. Andrew, so many basketball games came out for those systems, and there was just endless amount of basketball fun that could be had.
And some of them hold up really well even to this day. I mean, if you're younger and didn't grow up with them, it might be hard to really appreciate them as much as we can or really get into them because of the lack of features or indeed the graphics, but there's a lot of them that you and I definitely will go back and very happily play and spend a lot of time with and still have a blast with.
We have. Actually, we've connected on Coach K. We're going to be playing College Slam soon. We played your version of NCAA basketball. We've played the original NBA Jam. Like, we're still playing these games.
Super Dunk Shot.
Yeah, exactly. Super Dunk Shot. And they're still fun. So the non-basketball games, Star Fox blew us away. Played a ton of that. Just the 3D graphics, all of that. We're like, oh my God, how is this even possible that the visuals look like this? We didn't even care that it was in like 20 FPS. It didn't matter to us. It was just the visuals were amazing. Ultraman, Super Mario World, Super Mario Kart, which I still contest as the greatest Mario Kart game of all time. I challenge anybody to face off with me on Ghost Valley with me using Toad. Super Punch-Out. We love the original Punch-Out. Super Punch-Out gave, updated graphics, some of the same characters, but also some new ones. Time Trial, the same great gameplay. Actually, I could contest that it's even better. Super Punch-Out is an amazing game. Top Gear was excellent, and it was my second racing game ever because I used to play RC Pro-Am, which I mentioned before, for the NES. And Top Gear has one of the best soundtracks in racing game history. And Top Gear 2 didn't live up to the standard of the first one. But yeah, the original Top Gear is just a great game. Super Tennis and Super Soccer, played a lot of those. Super Tennis, like I stated before, tennis was my second sport. It was my dad was a big fan of it. My brothers liked it as well. So we had a summer of Super Tennis when we were younger where we were playing basically every single day on that game, and we were playing grand slams against each other, using the hard court, grass court, clay court, etc. And we were keeping track of the matches and who was winning and everything in a notepad. It was a lot of fun. Boogerman and Earthworm Jim, two great side scrollers. Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2. I'm a bigger fan of 1. I know that you love 2, but both are great games. Chrono Trigger, F-Zero. F-Zero is amazing. F-Zero X on N64 was good, but I'll always love the original more. Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, Goof Troop, which is a great game to play 2 players and would still be a great game for you with a significant other or with a friend now. Let's see here. Kirby was a big deal in my house at one point. Kirby's Avalanche, Kirby's Dream Course, and Kirby Superstar. We owned all 3 of those. Played the hell out of all of them. Kirby's Dream Course was basically like a golf style game where Kirby was basically the ball. Kirby's Avalanche was a Tetris style Kirby game, and Kirby Superstar was an adventure game, side scroller that you could actually play with a friend. And my brother and I played that and beat that several times. Joe Montana Football and Madden 94 were the football games that I played on those consoles, as well as Troy Aikman Football. And Troy Aikman Football was unique because it gave you the ability to basically make the season schedule any way you wanted. So if I wanted to play against my brother's team in every single game, let's say I was using the Falcons and he was using the Steelers, we could just set the season that way and play against each other all 16 games. And I thought that was a cool little thing that you could do with that game. NHL 94, which is just an amazing hockey game. Triple Play Gold Edition, Muhammad Ali heavyweight boxing, Evander Holyfield Real Deal boxing. Back then, boxing was also big in our house. We would always get the fights on pay-per-view. This is the days of Mike Tyson, Riddick Bowe, Lennox Lewis, like Michael Moore. It was those days, George Foreman, etc. And then Rock and Roll Racing was also a big hit in our house. And I thought this game was super cool because it's a racing game where they actually got the rights to real legendary rock and roll songs. So like George Thorogood, Bad to the Bone plays in the game. Steppenwolf, Born to be Wild. Black Sabbath, Paranoid. Golden Earring, Radar Love. It has a Judas Priest song on there, Rush, all of that stuff. Rock and Roll Racing has great gameplay and a great soundtrack, and you can get immersed in that game. So I recommend that to anybody. Uniracers, which you already talked about. Ren and Stimpy Beat-Its, which was a side-scroller Ren and Stimpy game. Ren and Stimpy was my favorite cartoon growing up. And the video game captured the awesomeness of that cartoon. So we played that. That was only a one-player game, though. For Sega, obviously, Sonic and Sonic 2. Sonic 2 was great because you could play the whole game through with a friend. So, like, he could use Tails, and you would use Sonic, and you could play it all the way through. So I'll always prefer Sonic 2 over the original. And then we obviously had Super Bomberman, Super Mario All-Stars, Tiny Toons Wacky Sport Challenge, which my fingers hurt just thinking about it. Tiny Toons Wacky Sport Challenge was basically going through Olympic-style events with Tiny Toons characters. So like lifting and skiing and all of that stuff. And it required you to use like multiple fingers to rapidly tap buttons in order to win events. And I can't even tell you how tired and sore our hands were.
Those controls are built to last.
Right, exactly. I can't even believe the controllers made it through these sessions. It's insane. In a similar vein, I mentioned Track and Field 2 for NES. That was kind of the same type of deal. And then Yoshi's Island and Yoshi's Cookie. And Yoshi's Cookie is very similar to like Kirby's Avalanche, very similar to Tetris, very similar to Dr. Mario. Those games were also big hits in my house. So like I stated, Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, all of those games that I just mentioned, we spent a lot of time on, along with all of those basketball video games. So video games were such a big thing in my house.
And you're right, we did grow up with them. You and I have been playing since, I guess, at the very least, the late 80s. Our introduction through various consoles and so forth, and early PCs. In my part, the TI Basic had a cartridge system, but also you could, with TI Basic, you could program your own games, and we had books to do that, and so forth. You mentioned a lot of classics there. Again, just so many great games back in the day, sinking hours upon hours into. We love our basketball games, but we definitely have broader horizons than that. I do want to mention Mortal Kombat, of course, was big for me. I still remain a fan of that series to this day. I think I own all of the ones that I possibly can own on the consoles that I own. I think there's a couple of handhelds that I've never played, some spin-off games. And there's a couple that I traded in that I don't have. The Sub-Zero spin-off, the Mythologies, Mortal Kombat Mythologies, quite expensive to actually buy again these days. But I have.
And Andrew, how bad were some of those knockoffs? Really quick.
Oh, the spin-offs were bad. Yeah.
Like Primal Rage and King of the Monsters.
Yeah.
And games like those are two games that I owned actually, and we didn't spend a ton of time on them, which is why I mentioned them. There were a lot of attempts at creating Mortal Kombat games that just kind of failed.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Of course, the Tattoo Assassins, the one that actually had nudalities, which led to the urban legend that they were in Mortal Kombat. No, it was a different game, a Mortal Kombat knockoff that had that. So that was big for me as well, Mortal Kombat, still to this day. And I did play the Intellivision, which was my introduction to gaming, really. Astro Smash, Night Stalker, Burger Time, a classic there that was on many consoles back in the day, including NES. I think the Atari and the Intellivision versions, apart from the original arcade version, of course, are some of the best home ports. And of course, I can't believe that I didn't mention this until now, but maybe saving the best until last, Eric, Bart versus the Space Mutants.
So first off, I want to say Burger Time. I played that on the NES, and that game is actually fun. But I didn't spend a great deal of time on it, which is why I didn't mention it. And Bart versus the Space Mutants is an NLSC meme at this point, but at the same time, it's endearing that you continually bring it up, because as bad as that the game is, it holds a special place in your heart.
It does. Maybe it shouldn't, but it does.
No, it absolutely shouldn't. I mean, there's certain games that I go back and play, and I'm like, what the hell was I thinking? Yeah. And the original Ghostbusters for NES is one of the worst games I have ever played. It's not as bad as E.T., but
it's up there. It's up there. The sequel,
it's right up there.
The sequel's not much better. I'd say it's better, the sequel, but not by much. It's a low bar.
No, and I think, like you said, Angry Video Game Nerd did something on that original, like a video on that original Ghostbusters game. And I haven't watched that video. I'm going to have to, because he is pretty entertaining at times. But I'm sure he called it out for all its flaws. It's just not good. But I spent so much time on it, which is crazy.
And I think we learn to make our own fun with some of those games. I mean, of course, you rent a game for the weekend, you're kind of stuck with it. You kind of try and make the best of it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, see, that's the thing, though, is back then, you were just blown away that you were able to pick up a control and control the action on a screen.
Sure.
Right? So even if the story was crappy, even if the controls weren't very good and everything, it's like, man, I'm controlling what's going on that screen. So we put up with a lot, I think, back then.
And of course, we won't get into it on this show because it's a big, deeper topic for another time. The latest patch for NBA 2K23 PC has caused some interruptions with the hook tool and modding. So, Derek, what a better time than to get into some Bart versus the Space Mutant modding?
There you go. See, exactly. NBA 2K23, whatever that patch did, conflicted with the hook tool. So every single time I put on 2K23 and try to finish a game, it crashes. We haven't been able to finish one game of NBA 2K23 since the patch. So hopefully at some point the hook tool gets an update. But again, that tool is free. And if the person who created that, which is Luya, doesn't have the free time to create it, I mean, we just have to, deal with that, because it's just amazing what he's been able to do for the community up to this point anyway.
But you know what doesn't crash, Derek? Ghostbusters. Maybe it should.
Ghostbusters? Well, I mean, sometimes I wished when I tried to put it in my NES that the cartridge wouldn't work.
Did you finish it?
Did you get on the bottom of the? I believe I did. I'd have to go back and look at the end game.
Well, then, congratulations! You have finished a great game. Now go rest our heroes. That's the most infamous game over a winning screen. You have proved the justice of our culture. Proved is also misspelled in that. That is something that AVGN covers, and there was. I mean, that's the thing. We can talk about nostalgia, and the classics hold up. They absolutely hold up. Even if they've been surpassed, they're still fun to revisit, and they deserve to be recognized as the classics they are. Some of them, however, it was the infancy of game design, Derek, and it shows in some cases.
Yeah, and I also want to point out some of the end game stuff was so underwhelming. Like, you go through an epic adventure on Contra, you beat the game, you beat this amazing final boss, which is basically it's like a heart. And once it dies, it just goes right to the credits. And it's like, well, thanks.
You won.
Yeah. Right, exactly. It's basically, might as well just show text on the screen that says you won or you beat the game, and then just move on. But a lot of end game stuff back then was very underwhelming.
So once again, we've played a lot of games over the years. We are passionate basketball gamers, passionate basketball fans. But we certainly have had vast collections and vast experiences with video games over the years, Derek. And I wouldn't change that. It's why I'm still passionate about the hobby today. Obviously, basketball gaming is what I do primarily. It's what I create content about. But like you, all these great memories of games. And yes, I will definitely switch to other genres when I need to take some time off the virtual hardwood.
Yeah, same here. And I think the biggest reason why I do play other games, especially today, is because of my brothers, right? Because I don't really enjoy playing games solo that much. So really a lot of the titles that you hear me talking about that we've been playing or recently put down, but we're playing a lot, it's because I'm playing it in a cooperative experiance.
Exactly. And it's not a brain-rotting experience, no more than any other supposed hobby. So it's we'd really need to hit back against that elitist and an outdated attitude. We're seeing less of it over time. That generation is sort of not really having the say about it that they used to, I guess, or people are kind of pointing out that video games are big business, and they're even careers, obviously. So, yeah, what are you doing playing those games? Just unwinding, just having some fun and socializing as well. And, so whether it's basketball or otherwise, video games are a valid hobby and a very fun one, too.
100%. And I'm going to play until I can't play anymore. I've said this before. Why put down such a fun hobby? It doesn't make sense. But yeah, the community chimed in too. I think we got about 7 or 8 responses from them as far as games that they're playing that are not basketball related. So why don't we get to those?
Yeah, let's take a look. And first of all, we have Big Cos Media, shout out to you, says Tecmo Super Bowl, NES, SNES, and Genesis, Tecmo Bowl on NES, Bases Loaded 1 and 2 for NES, the NFL Blitz series, PS1, N64, Dreamcast, PS2, and the OG Xbox, NFL Street 1 and 2, PS2 and OG Xbox, Griffey Jr. presents MLB for SNES, and also goes on, 2 tweets here, lots of favorites, lots of classics here, Super Mario Bros. 1 to 3 on NES, Super Mario World and Super Mario All-Stars on SNES, Mortal Kombat 2, Arcade SNES and Genesis, Sonic 1 and 2 for Genesis, Turtles in Time for SNES, Final Fight for SNES, Street Fighter 2 Turbo SNES, and Double Dragon 2 The Revenge for NES. Yes, that last one in particular is a favorite of mine as well, and lots of great games in those tweets.
So I'm going to venture to guess he likes football, Andrew.
I think so, yeah.
That's just a wild guess. Also, he mentioned Ken Griffey Baseball. One game I forgot to mention that my brother and I are playing constantly today is MLB The Show 20, actually. And we're really deep into a season on that. So, yeah, we definitely love our baseball games every now and then. He brings up some classic side scrollers. He brought up NFL Blitz, which I think a lot of people who love that NBA Jam style gameplay absolutely dig games like NFL Blitz, right? And I think that it's a twist on somebody's favorite sport that can just be an absolute blast. And that's the same reason why we love NBA Jam, right? It's a twist on our favorite sport. And it's a zany, it's basically a zany version of what we already love. And how can you not love that? So, he brought up a lot of great titles in there.
And if you're not as familiar with the sport as some of my friends who aren't as big into basketball as me, but they loved NBA Jam, it makes that sport more accessible to a casual fan.
Oh, no, 100%. And I think that's why NBA Jam was so wildly successful.
Definitely.
Right out of the gate, is because even people that didn't love basketball
love Jam, yeah.
could just absolutely love it because it was all just about fun, fast-paced action and craziness and whatnot. And, yeah, I agree. I think that games like NFL Blitz, NFL Street, NBA Street, NBA Jam, all of that stuff, those games are just accessible for everybody.
And speaking of NFL Blitz, Avery, at Avery Semp on Twitter, shout out to you, mentions NFL Blitz as well as NFL 2K5, a game I know a lot of people still hold in high regard, and Sunday Rivals, to name a few.
NFL 2K5 is currently still being modded. People are modding the emulated version of that game. It is still considered one of the best football games gameplay-wise, but also presentation-wise. If you remember correctly, it has like the halftime show and all that stuff with Chris Berman and everything. It has that amazing ESPN style presentation, and there's a reason why when people talk about the greatest football video games of all time, NFL 2K5 pretty much always gets brought up. A lot of people still prefer that gameplay to the new Maddens and whatnot as well. So we've always talked about it. Gameplay being paramount, gameplay being the most important, and NFL 2K5 scratches that itch of perfection for people.
And still on the football train here, King J Mace says, I'm a big NCAA football guy outside of b-ball games. Baseball-wise, SMB3 is fun AF. I haven't played that one. I'm not a big baseball guy myself.
No, so King J Mace is going to be on the next NLSC podcast. Spoiler alert, Andrew.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to be a great guest. He's going to be talking about the Elite Street League that he has going on NBA 2K23 that he's playing with the community through Parsec. Learn a little bit more about him and whatnot. So like for me, football and baseball games have always just kind of been randomly part of our rotation. Like for us, it's MLB The Show 08, MLB The Show 20, Triple Play Gold Edition, which came out in like 1995 or 1996, and also RBI Baseball. Those have been the main baseball games in my life. While we weren't huge fans of watching the sport, the video games we were always into because of the stat tracking, right? Because of how much baseball is about stats and stat goals and whatnot. So that's why we usually play those games. And for NFL, outside of NFL 2K1, it was basically just Madden every single year for us. And we always pick up the new Madden, and we'll always play it a little bit each year.
Next up, we have Big Perk at SweetJones_OTF, of course. Shout out to you. Got to be GTA, MLB, and of Get My Fighters there in Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, Call of Duty, Battlefield 2042. Yeah, I'm a big GTA fan myself. Haven't been as big on the recent games as I said. I kind of still have that passion for the PS2 era, dated as they may be. But yeah, and of course Mortal Kombat I'm a fan of as well. Always more of a fan of Mortal Kombat than Street Fighter. I think it was the novelty, Derek, of the fatalities and so forth in that game that really appealed to me as a kid who probably shouldn't have been playing that young. Probably shouldn't have been playing them that young, and my dad wasn't too happy about it, but got over that, and yes, it's been a favorite of mine ever since.
Andrew, forgive yourself. You were a kid. You loved violence.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. Like seeing blood in a video game, and being able to kick the hell out of somebody. Like,
he ripped his heart out. Look at that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something that I think, appreciated a lot more back then than we even do now, right? Because that's something that was almost like a first for us, at the time. And whenever it's a first, it's always just a little bit more wow, a little bit, you have more of the wow factor and everything. I was never into the GTA games. I know that Sweet Jones loves his football. I know that he's also friends with VF Baller, and they share that in common. So not surprising that he loves football games.
And Juicy Shack Meat, shout out to you, says, outside of basketball games, I started Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild when I got the game 2 weeks ago. My wife and I used different saves, playing it in turns. Also got back to playing Overcooked All You Can Eat with some Discord pals, and is looking to be a regular thing soon. And yeah, once again, you've got that multiplayer experience, which is really cool. And since I haven't had a Nintendo console since the N64, I haven't played any of the newer Zeldas since Majora's Mask, the last one on N64, which I kind of envy because some of those games look really awesome. But yeah, I'm all about Legend of Zelda as well, and Breath of the Wild has been very critically acclaimed and loved by gamers. And of course, the new Tears of the Kingdom is coming soon as well, I believe. That's been a lot of people talking about that trailer, and absolute classic is Zelda.
So I never played any other Zelda other than the original, the one for NES. That was the only Zelda I have ever played. My brother Nick loves those games. I think he's played the majority of them. But me, it's not that the gameplay didn't stick with me. It's just the fact that I was never a big fan of solo experience, right? Unless I was kind of like forced into it and I had nobody to play with. So Zelda games I've never really gotten into as a result. Unless you want to call me playing Super Smash Brothers using Zelda.
Kind of, in a way.
As a Zelda game, I guess, sort of. But yeah, I know Juicy Shack Meat loves the one hell of a name again, by the way, Juicy Shack Meat. I know that he loves his multiplayer gameplay because he's getting into Parsec. He's really active on the NLSC Discord, talking to people about the games and everything. So yeah, he's an awesome community member despite his name.
Roger Ward, one of the NBA Live 2001 legends, of course, friend of the show. Along with Nate Starshow, says, I'm still stuck on 2 of the best games ever made for their respective sports, in my opinion, NCAA Football 14 and MVP 2005. They hold up really well, especially NCAA with an active roster-sharing community. You can play with any full roster from 2013 to current day. And yeah, I mean, that's why people are so excited about NCAA football coming back. And I think I have heard people talking about MVP 2005 as well before.
So Roger and Nate have been... the 2 Live 01 legends have been uploading gameplay to the YouTube of them playing MVP Baseball 2005 co-op. And I just think that's awesome because the way co-op works in games like MVP Baseball or, like on the Madden games, on football games, is it's more specialized, right? Because you basically have to you can't just alternate batters, right? Or you can't just like alternate who pitches to each batter and everything. It's like one person controls the batter, one person controls the pitcher, etc. At least that's the way my brother and I have done it in the past. And then in Madden, it's like one person needs to be the quarterback, and then the other person controls like the running back and the receivers and all of that stuff. So it really is a super team effort to try to get a W in those games as a result. And you have to communicate, especially on the football games. But I know they love MVP Baseball 2005. They've been uploading a ton of footage of it, live streaming it, etc. Nate Stasho recently did an MVP Baseball 2005 video. I think he's called it something like the greatest game ever made. But it's actually him giving commentary over a game that he had against the CPU, a game that he ended up winning. And he's funny as hell on the mic. So if you haven't checked that out, go to the Live 01 Legends YouTube channel and check out Nate's MVP Baseball 2005 video.
Definitely check out what the guys are doing, everything that they're doing on that channel. But, Derek, playing a game from 2013 for so many years afterwards couldn't be me,
Yeah, your obsession with NBA 2K14.
Yeah.
I mean, look at my brother and my obsession right now with NBA Live 2000, NBA Live 2004, and NBA Inside Drive 2003. Those three games are over basically 20 years old or older. And we are playing those games like every single week for a decent amount of hours. So, some of these games just don't get old.
We have no regrets, and we make no apologies for our gaming habits, quite frankly, as nobody should. But we have a couple of responses on the Discord as well. Remember, if you want to get involved with the NLSC Discord, there is a link on the site. Just head over to nb-live.com and click the Discord link and join us over there as well. And, of course, join us in the forum and everything else we're doing with the NLSC. But, yes, we do have a couple of responses from the Discord here to the prompt that you put out, Derek. Sluggy Sports, who has participated in our tournaments before, says WWE 2K and FIFA. So some pro wrestling and association football/soccer there.
Yeah, nice to hear that, actually. Like I said, Super Soccer was my game back in the day for the Super Nintendo. Dabbled a little bit in FIFA over the years, but nothing recently. But I know that those games for people who love soccer, FIFA, Pro Evolution Soccer, etc., are just big hits with people. And those games still fascinate me as far as like from an animation perspective. A lot of them are so well animated. You can actually, and because of the zoomed out camera view, sometimes you can watch those games and it look like a real televised broadcast. It looks amazing. So very cool. And then he mentioned WWE 2K. I honestly don't think I've played a wrestling video games since WCW versus NWO World Tour for the N64 because I never liked wrestling. I know that you're a big wrestling person, but I was never like a wrestling fan.
Yeah.
I've never chosen to watch wrestling. However, in video games, I know that it can be fun.
Well, I mean, video games treat it like a real sport, so that kind of there's a difference there. It becomes
right, there's no script there unless you're letting the other person win.
It becomes a bit of a combat sport for real. Yes, that's right. I do play WWE 2K. Haven't got 2K23 yet. Been holding off because I haven't been as impressed with the recent ones, so I've been holding off until they go on sale a few months later, and I can get all the DLC on sale as well. But 2K22 is one the most recent one that I have. Also, the last one with the Iconics, the Australian women's tag team, in there, of course, since they are no longer with the company. And finally, we have Amoli91. Amoli in the forum, of course, shout out to you, says, I play old school Pro Evolution Soccer 5, FIFA 16, Call of Duty Warzone with a friend, and some co-op games with one of my brothers. I'm trying to play single-player games, but haven't had the time to dedicate to one. And that is a big thing with single-player games, like your GTAs, like your Fallouts, etc., that you do have this big immersive world and that you can get stuck in, and one more level, one more quest, whatever. And it can be very time-consuming, so I definitely understand that as well. And certainly if you do prefer the multiplayer experience and you've got someone there to play with, I can see why you wouldn't play as many single-player games. But they can be a huge time sink as well, so I definitely get that.
Can I just say how awesome of NLSC community member in person Armoli is in general? Him and I have connected on NBA Showtime, NBA on NBC. He played in the NBA Live 10 tournament. We connected on a couple other games. We also played the NBA Jam Legends on Fire Edition mod recently on the same team. He is awesome to play video games with, and he's super active on the NLSC Discord. Shout out to Armoli. I mean, he's mentioning not having time to play the solo experience. And I think that a lot of that is also him preferring multiplayer, right? I find myself making time to play multiplayer. And then if I have any free time, I seek out multiplayer. And just going by the way he talks on the forum and the way he talks on the Discord and everything, I think that he just overall prefers multiplayer just like I do. And I think that that's healthy. I think it's really cool to, connect and have these shared experiences.
And thank you again to everybody who's answered that prompt and shared those games that they're playing. And I think it's definitely fun, Derek, to reflect on other games that we play. I think it does tie into how we play basketball games. As I said before, the way that I play Fallout definitely reflects the way that I build characters, build my players in 2K14's My Career as well. And it's nice as a fun change of pace to talk about these other games because obviously, again, we love basketball games, but there's a lot of games that have shaped our a lot of different titles and genres that have shaped our gaming habits over the years and given us hours upon hours of entertainment.
Yeah, basketball games will always be primary. They were primary back in the day. They're primary today. They're even more primary today. But at the same time, it is fun to play, especially for me, multiplayer on other games, like the ones that I mentioned, Remnant from the Ashes, Code Vein, Elden Ring, and stuff like that. And the one of the best parts of that is just the fact that I'm able to share that experience with my brother, right? And we have such a good time, and we create so many memories doing it. We take on challenges together. We work towards a common goal, and to me, that will always beat the solo experience. Solo experience can be great. It can be challenging. It can be fun. It can be memorable. But I'm just always going to seek out that multiplayer.
No, a lot of fun to be talking about these other games for a change of pace. We will be getting back to basketball gaming next week, although I'm sure we'll talk about some of King J Mace's other favourites here and there. In the meantime, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. As always, we thank you for tuning in and invite you to join us again next week, either on the NLSC, nb-live.com, our YouTube channel, or your podcast app of choice. In the meantime, please connect with us on social media. That's where you can get in touch with us and, of course, stay up to date with all of our content. So, Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
You can reach me on Twitter, where I'm the most active, at D43G and at D4384. I'm also on YouTube, D43, and on the NLSC, D43.
I am Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on Twitter. The NLSC is on Twitter and Facebook at the NLSC. Our Instagram is NLSC Basketball. We're on YouTube at youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. And of course, give it a look to the NLSC itself, nb-live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. So, thank you once again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.